Yeah, that's it.
Yes, but actually, if you look at the scene, if you're talking here, we're not going to see all of you. So I'm wondering if you should. Yeah, so maybe you should come up here and we'll just move this up here, and I think we should be okay. And actually, what else we can do? This is a very sensitive microphone as well. So, but it's wireless, so we can move this over here, and we can move this up here. And do you want that podium?
Or we could, yeah, whatever.
Okay,
I mean,
you tell me. You tell me where
you know this place better than me.
No, you tell me wherever you want to stand. That's it.
So the projection's going to be.
It's right there. You see,
Yeah.
You see over there.
So it could be fairly small.
No, that's just because of the screen. I can make that big. I can make the speaker.
Right, speaker view.
In fact, I think I'm going to do that because if you're going to show some slides, we should probably do that. Here's my watch, see? I don't know why. All right, so if you have that drive, yeah, so we
Where are we going to do this here? I guess so. Yeah. So there's a remote.
No.
Yeah, people on sheet know will only see that.
So I can get the slideshow just really now we're back to where we started. And they won't see you. But I can share the whole screen so we see you
There are not that many with 2 weddings. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think there's one of them who's in my family. Here's the 2 moms. Yeah, but yes, and I think most of the time people miss them. Yeah.
So, we're in the hall real quick.
Yeah, let's see what I think. All right, so this is the microphone that works. I think I'm going to bring up, I'll either stand here or bring it. What do you think is better? Okay. Are we using this for anything else? No. Okay. This one? No. There aren't that many, you know, yeah, exactly. So I've done some research and find a place to get spurred on by you. Yeah, but so that's great. And usually, you know, the geography determines talking to a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure what a lot of food is. Wherever.
So one of the items on the raffle basket is your phone.
Oh yeah, it works. Yeah, it works.
talk after you.
All right, everybody, welcome. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us here. We're going to get started in a minute. We're starting at 2 o'clock Jewish time. We all know what that means. It means we're getting the goodies ready, so. Okay, so, you're going to talk to nobody's about, right?
No, I think you're gonna talk.
I'm going to talk first.
Oh, I'll talk whenever you want me to talk.
If I said that, I'd never talk. Okay, I'd like to introduce Cantor Jonathan Friedmann, Ph.D., Professor of Jewish Music History and Academic Dean of the Master of Jewish Studies program and Rabbinical School at the Academy for Jewish Religion. California is our guest speaker. Did I get all that right?
Works.
Wow, you're very accomplished. No, it's wonderful to have somebody of your stature and your education here to talk to us. And you're going to be telling us a little bit about this area and some of the people that built the Jewish presence in this area. So when we say area, we're talking just Ontario, Pomona, or just
Inland Empire broadly.
okay. Let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm from Lake Elsinore. I understand that, and you can tell me that that was a refuge for people that were leaving the Holocaust. There was 2 synagogues there at one point, right after World War II.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. In fact, one of the synagogues in the area still has some.
You
One of the synagogues. You can't hear me?
No,
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, my God. All right, why don't you come on up?
Yeah.
Can I just want to say
Yeah.
a word. I'm so sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Say a
Hi,
word.
I'm Shelley Klein. I am co-president, I'm co-president of the Sharon Group of Hadassah. I just want to welcome you all, our speaker. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Sisterhood and the congregation for allowing our joint Hadassah and TSO program to take place here. And Hadassah, for those who don't know, it's the largest Jewish women's organization in the world. We have over 300,000 members. We're over 100 years old. We primarily raise money for the Hadassah medical organizations in Israel that treat and train and staff people of all religions and ethnicities in Israel. They're also on the cutting edge of a lot of research. Here in the States, we are active in fighting against anti-Semitism and advocating for women and children's health initiatives. So thank you on behalf of Hadassah for allowing this program to take place here. And now I'd like to introduce Andrea Tarr, who is the chair of our Safe Reads Book Club for Hadassah, and an accomplished librarian, expert on all things literary, and my dear friend, Andrea Tarr. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon and thank you very much for attending this special presentation. As the rabbi gave you an idea already, we have our guest here, Dr. Jonathan Friedmann, and this event is brought to you by the Sharon Group of Hadassah, Temple Shalom, and the Sisterhood of Temple Shalom. Our guest this afternoon is Dr. Jonathan Friedmann, the director of the online Jewish Museum of the American West, which is dedicated to chronicling the Jews of this area. A professor of music history, a cantor, Jonathan holds a BA and an MA in religious studies, a leading voice in humanistic Judaism. He has published several articles on the sociology of religion and musicology. Additionally, Jonathan has written or edited some 30 books on a variety of topics. His vast background in California history has inspired him to write such books as Jewish Gold Country, as well as Jewish Los Angeles. I know we're each eager to time travel today to the past while Jonathan enlightens us on the early Jewish pioneers of this era. And when you're finished talking, we have a wonderful raffle basket that we are raffling off with a copy of your book in it and a lot of other things that have to do with what we call Hanukkah in June. So somebody here is going to be a lucky winner, and we ask you, when we're all finished, if you will pick the ticket. Okay?
All right.
Well, thank you very much. It's all yours.
Hope you can hear me okay.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I know any of you, so when the raffle comes around, it's not rigged in any way. So, as was mentioned, we'll be looking today really at the very early period of Jewish settlement in the Inland Empire. We're talking the 19th century, as a matter of fact. And, you know, this area, while it is vast and there have been very important people, one that we won't talk about today because I didn't know we were supposed to include Pomona, although that's where I live, is the founder of Pomona, Louis Phillips. His ranch was parceled out and is now, and has been for some time, the city of Pomona. I'm happy to come back and talk about that at some point. I actually just moved to Pomona a couple of weeks ago. I was living in Moreno Valley and then Claremont. I didn't realize how close Pomona was to here. So I learned something on my drive today. Everything seems to be right next to each other in this part of California. So there will be slides over here, so I apologize, but you'll have to look over there when I'm alluding to them. The first one is our title, Inland Empire, Jewish Inland Empire Pioneers. I'm glad I'm wearing my glasses. We'll go to the second slide now. This is one of the projects that I'm in charge of. You can sort of see it there. Western States Jewish History Journal. This is the Journal of the Western States Jewish History Association, of which I'm the president. I'm the editor of the journal. If you want to subscribe, I can give you some information about that afterwards as well. But we've been publishing since 1968 on Jews and our presence and impact in the broader Trans-Mississippi west of the Mississippi. California does play a major role in that, of course, and we've also had quite a few articles and research pieces on the Inland Empire, and that's what I'm going to be bringing to you today as well. Next slide. This is our museum homepage of the Jewish Museum of the American West. Easy to remember, I hope, jmaw.org. And that's where much of our research, again, dating back to the 60s, is distilled into bite-sized chunks. We call them exhibits. We have about 600 exhibits on there, organized in different regions and different areas of the American West. Again, Southern California has a large presence there as well. And finally, for introduction, the next slide. That's the book I think that was alluded to earlier, Jewish Los Angeles. It's a photo history book of Los Angeles Jewry from about 1840 to 1950. And again, those photographs are drawn from the Western States Jewish History Archive, and it was a great pleasure to put that book together for the museum. Okay, we'll continue now with the next slide. So you can kind of see this, but this is an image of the first reference to the Inland Empire. The name the Inland Empire actually dates to a period of manifest destiny, when there was, of course, the push to colonize the wide open West, as it were. There's an Inland Empire in Texas. There's another one in Washington State. Even Stockton, California was called the Inland Empire in the late 1800s. But the Southern California Inland Empire has its own unique sort of etymology. Of course, it's inland, right? Inland of what? Los Angeles, about 60 miles or so, given where you might be. And the empire part actually comes from the Orange Empire, because out here in the old days, they grew a lot of oranges. It was called the Old Empire. You put inland and empire together. And that's why when someone asks you who's the emperor, you can tell them the orange, I guess. I don't know. Nevertheless, that's where we are. So today's Inland Empire, thank you, covers about 27,000 square miles of Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And it was, again, originally a major center of agriculture and is now a mix of suburban and rural areas. You can't see necessarily the figures and facts on there, but I happened to write them down, so that's good. There are roughly 18,675 Jews in the Inland Empire, living in the Inland Empire today, out of about 4.6 million people. So not a huge population. These are 2020 stats, and just thinking about my own biography, in 2020, I was living in Moreno Valley, so I might have been counted in this number. I now live in Pomona, which is technically LA County. So that's the way statistics go. But nevertheless, we could say roughly 19,000 Jews. Of course, the largest cities in the Inland Empire are Riverside, San Bernardino, Fontana, Moreno Valley, Rancho Cucamonga, Ontario, Corona, Victorville, Temecula, and Murrieta. Some of these we'll be talking about today. So how about the early Jewish presence in the Inland Empire? Well, Jews started to settle this area in the early 1850s. San Bernardino County split from LA County around, actually in 1853, and the town of San Bernardino was originally laid out and settled by Mormons from Salt Lake City. Now, Jewish merchants from Los Angeles did wholesale business with San Bernardino and Salt Lake City. And in those days, in the mid to late 1800s, there was quite a bit of cooperation, both business and otherwise, between Jews and Mormons. It's a whole history if you're interested. But especially in the winter months, these Jewish merchants from Los Angeles became very important to the San Bernardino area, where snows made trade with the eastern parts of the country impossible. And in this slide as well, if you see that image there of the building, that is the Harris Company, which some of you might remember if you've been around here long enough. The Harris Company was a retail corporation based in San Bernardino, and it operated a chain of Southern California stores in San Bernardino, Riverside, and Kern counties. Was named after the three Harris brothers, Philip, Arthur, and Herman, who were actually nephews of Leo Harris, who was the founder of an early Los Angeles-based chain called Harris and Frank. Some of you might remember that as well. And they grew out, that is the three sons, grew their building or their business out of that original LA establishment, which was founded in 1856. And this is a theme and a sort of recurring trope, as it were, that we see in Jewish history with migration patterns. The family business idea, we'll encounter that for sure. You know, anytime you look at American history, and certainly Jewish history in the American West, and by the way, it's forgotten these days, but peddling, the act of pushing your goods from town to town, and that migration was really well suited for people who were on the move, right? They could move from one area to another if it became inhospitable, if there were any anti-Semitic energies there, or if there was a boom town and it became a ghost town and they had to move to the next one. It was really quite an advantageous business, and it really connected Jews in the New World and the Old World as well. There were business connections between Jewish families in the peddling business that stretched to Europe as well. So when we're learning about these different people who typically come from Europe, they don't leave Europe without any ties. There's a business tie usually, and this is really the key to the success of these people. So in the next slide, we see one of them. This is Marcus Katz. Marcus Katz was born in 1820 in a small town near Frankfurt in today's Germany. He landed in Baltimore, Maryland in 1845, where he worked as a clerk in a Jewish store, and the California gold rush drew him to San Francisco via Panama, and he arrived there late in 1850. Unlike some of his colleagues, like, I don't know, Levi Strauss and others, he didn't find much success in San Francisco, so instead he came down to what was then really a nascent village of Los Angeles in 1852, and he entered a general merchandise business with Henry Baumann. And Baumann and Katz was exceedingly successful. Marcus cashed out of the business about 6 months into it. He moved out to San Bernardino and obtained special permission from the Mormon community to open a general merchandise store. This is an image of his wife, Leah Jacobs Katz, in slide before, please.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you. In 1853, Marcus Katz moved to San Diego, where he met and married Leah Jacobs. Now, this is a beautiful love story, but it's also kind of an interesting historical story as well. This may have been the first Jewish wedding in Southern California in 1853. And they returned to San Bernardino in 1857, where Marcus opened a stationery and bookstore. Marcus was appointed a notary public in 1858. Most of the Mormons were recalled back to Salt Lake City, and in that year he was appointed treasurer of San Bernardino County, and he held that post until 1865. Also in 1858, just to give you a sense of how a Jew with know-how and people skills and so forth was able to really succeed in the West, he was appointed by Wells Fargo as its agent in San Bernardino. He held that post until 1874, and in 1859, he was placed in charge of the U.S. commissary of 2 companies of U.S. troops stationed in San Bernardino as well. And during the 1870s and 80s, he purchased large portions of real estate within San Bernardino and the surrounding area. Next slide, please. This is Isaac Brun. Isaac Brun was born in 1836 in Prussian-occupied Poland. He arrived in Los Angeles in 1852, where he clerked in a general merchandise store. In 1858, at the age of 22, he became a United States citizen in Los Angeles. And he would move to San Bernardino in 1856. He became a wholesale dealer in cigars, foreign and domestic wines, and liquors. And he represented some of the well-known distilleries in the East with whom he actually became acquainted when he was living in Tennessee. Again, sort of this migration pattern story. He was elected as a member of the San Bernardino Board of Supervisors in the 1870s. And Brun also served as a member of the San Bernardino City Council for 8 years, including 4 years as its president. And this is an image, the next slide, of his store. So that's what it looked like back in those days. You can kind of see the name of the store if you look closely.
How's that?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right, and the next slide, please. So these 2 handsome gentlemen, Walter Lyon and Emil Julius Rosenthal, they are often identified as the first 2 Jews to make residence in Riverside. In 1872, Walter Lyon, who was then 18 years old, and Emil Julius Rosenthal, who was 27, arrived in what was then a very small town with few adobe houses and unpaved streets. They opened a general store called Lyon and Rosenthal. which prospered between 1872 and 1882. Walter Lyon, was born in New York in 1854. He came out to LA in 1870 to work for Harris Newmark, who's a very important name in LA Jewish history if it rings a bell at all, but really a pioneer of the LA Jewish community, who probably helped these two young men establish their store in San Bernardino as well. Now, Emil Rosenthal, he was born in 1845 in what is today's Germany, and arrived in the US shortly after the Civil War and received his citizenship in 1869. In addition to the store, Rosenthal was actually really crucial to the development of Riverside itself. Not only busy in real estate, but helped to establish the railroad there. He developed irrigation, gas, electricity, and water projects, and even the domestic water system for the city with underground pipes is really attributable to Rosenthal. The next slide, you'll see their story. Again, if you zoom in, you can see the name up top, Lyon and Rosenthal. Believe me, it's there. We continue now to the next slide. This is the charter for Paradise Lodge number 237 of the Independent Order of B'nai B'rith, 1875. So this lodge, lodge number 237 of B'nai B'rith, was formed in San Bernardino in May of 1875. Isidore Choinsky, again, if you know anything about San Francisco Jewish history, that name might ring a bell as well. But he was the president of the Grand Lodge of B'nai B'rith District 4, and he led an installation or an installing delegation which consisted principally of prominent Los Angeles Jews. The San Bernardino men who comprised Paradise Lodge's charter members included prominent members and merchants in the community who had arrived there both before and after the Civil War. Among them was Marcus Katz, who we saw earlier, who was elected the lodge president. Now, back in 1861, getting more into the formation of Jewish communities proper, Marcus Katz applied for a land charter for a Jewish cemetery in San Bernardino, and he later deeded the cemetery to the Paradise Lodge of B'nai B'rith. It was to be called Home of Eternity, and later that was deeded to Congregation Emmanuel of San Bernardino. There's another important sort of milestone in the development of Jewish communities out here. This was the Hebrew Association of San Bernardino, founded in 1879. So in that year, 1879, the Los Angeles Herald reported that this gentleman, Rabbi Aaron J. Messing of Congregation Beth Israel in San Francisco, had arrived in San Bernardino for a missionary visit, it was called. Rabbi Messing addressed the Jewish community in the Masonic Hall, which was fairly common in those days. A lot of Jews were members of the Masons and Oddfellows, etc. And at that meeting, the rabbi organized a religious association, which was a more formalized structure that took over some of the functions which had previously been attended by the Jewish Benevolent Society, which was founded in San Bernardino in 1861, to really, this is another common story, to start a cemetery and also to have high holiday services. Basically, Jewish ceremonies, when you didn't have a lot of Jews in a particular area in the West, they would be domestic services. People would do them in each other's homes. They would typically read from a printed book instead of a Torah scroll. The arrival of a Torah scroll typically happened later. The arrival of professional leadership would be much later. The development of synagogues would also be later. The immediate concern really was benevolent society. So again, a little word to the wise, if you do any investigation of the development of Jewish communities in the West, you'll see time and time again that first there's benevolent society, then there's a cemetery, then some years later there will be a synagogue, and then after that there will be a formalized structure like we have here with the Hebrew Association of San Bernardino. This very important woman is Henrietta Anker. She was born in 1835 in Prussia, where she was married to Louis Anker. And the Ankers arrived in San Bernardino in 1868 with their first son, Louis Jr., and yes, it was common for Jews to have juniors in those days too. Louis Anker operated a general merchandise store in San Bernardino where they had 3 more children. Now, Henrietta was really well known for her social skills. She was very much a mover and shaker among her social circles. And in 1886, she urged the Jewish women of San Bernardino to establish a charitable society. And that would be called the Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Society. As a founding member, she refused to hold any office. She wanted to be sort of neutral in the political side of things, but was really, again, the mover and the shaker of the organization. The Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Society carried on their charitable activities and fundraised after her demise, actually, as well. So in this next slide, you'll see an older Henrietta Anker. This is, unfortunately, she would pass away. In 1890, diabetes caught up to her. And that was a year when things were really picking up for the association. In 1890, the society joined the Associated Charities of San Bernardino to raise funds for an agricultural fair, and the Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Society supported a camp for tuberculosis patients in the Cajon Pass, as well as the Jewish orphan and Jewish senior citizen homes in both LA and San Francisco. The society also collected funds for the Casper Cohn Jewish Consumptive Hospital. Is the name Casper Cohn familiar to anyone? Well, his consumptive hospital in East Los Angeles was the beginning of what we now know as the City of Hope. Back then, it was a tuberculosis sanitarium, and LA basically pushed them out to Duarte because of fears of, the consumption disease there. And from there, it sort of took off and became what it is today. So I think if you walk into one of the main entrances there, you'll see a bust of Casper Cohn, or at least you did. I don't remember the last time if I saw that, but I've been told. Okay, so next slide, please. This is the last story I have to share, and afterwards, please, if there are any questions or comments, I love those. But this is Murrieta Hot Springs. Anyone been out there? Got some experience, okay. So, really fun story. I can only scratch the surface here. I wrote recently a rather extensive research article on the subject, published in that journal I was showing you earlier, by the way. So this is located, of course, in Riverside County, about 70 miles southwest of Los Angeles. There was a resort in the old days called Gunter's Murrieta Hot Springs. And who is Fritz Gunter? Well, he was not Jewish, but he was German, as the name suggests. And he purchased acreage there in 1902 after selling his saloon in LA. And it was a welcoming atmosphere for Jews. Why? Because I think you can see in that image, there was sort of accidentally these 6-sided stars emblazoned on several of the buildings and cottages, kind of giving it a look of a synagogue or something. Gunter insisted that the shapes were not meant to be stars of David at all, but were what he called carpenter's stars. And that was a real attraction, really, for, in the early days, affluent, acculturated, sort of upper class Jews in the LA area who wanted a resort, but other resorts in the Springs area were restricted. So this one became quite an attraction and really became, I think, at its peak like 90% Jewish clientele. And in fact, during the World War II years, when a lot of Jews from Hollywood who were sort of facing, the German-American Bund and other sort of anti-Jew in Hollywood kind of sentiment would go out to the Springs and sort of ironically were served by Germans, right? And anything they wanted, they sort of catered to all of their whims. And that's kind of an only in California kind of story. But guests were drawn not only to the stars, but also to mud baths. And there were 3 mineral hot springs there, reminiscent of the curative baths in Europe. And the natural features were advertised as fountains of youth, where guests could leave all their ailments behind. You can see another slide here of some of the baths, I believe. Bathhouses there. Interestingly too, in my research I found a lot of kind of testimonials that were written by people who went there, letters home and so forth. And there was one that was funny. There was a custom there to drink from these hot springs as well, which didn't taste very good and would actually kind of make you feel ill. And one of the people wrote home saying, I feel worse than I did before getting here, but I think that that's a sign that I'm getting better. So there you go. But as the years would go on, they would develop miniature golf courses, tennis, swimming, a host of evening activities, including dancing, cards, pool, live entertainment. Mickey Katz, the klezmer comedian, he was a very frequent guest there, as was Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices who did Bugs Bunny, etc. I mean, it was really a place to be. But interestingly, unlike the Catskills, right, in upper New York, there really wasn't anything specifically Jewish at the resort except for the Jews, right? Like they made it a Jewish resort by being attracted by these stars and so forth. And in fact, they didn't seem to mind that the menu was decidedly unkosher. They served hogs and chickens and cattle all raised and butchered on the grounds by non-Jews, etc. And they also were pretty sort of decadent in that regard. Their menus were lavish. They would hand out antacids quite a bit for people who would overindulge on things like lobster salad and roasted pork legs. So again, it was Jewish, but it was a different kind of Jewish. In fact, it is also reported that they quite enjoyed the Christmas tree and other seasonal decorations in the dining room. So let's go to the final slide here. Just a little bit of a summary, and again, we're only scratching the surface here. That's an image right there of Ontario, where we're standing or sitting here from 1855. And a quotation I took from David Epstein, who's the founder of the Jewish Museum in the American West, my predecessor. He said that the story of Jews in the American West is the story of what happened when a group of people persecuted for 2,000 years was let loose in a vast new area, the American Wild West, where virtually no one cared about their religion and where they were free to explore seemingly endless avenues to make a living and raise their families. Thank you. So maybe before the raffle, if anyone has a question or a comment, I think we have time. I haven't been keeping track of time. Yes?
I had years ago heard that when the first Jews came through the Mojave Desert, at the bottom of the hill, they were greeted by the Mormons. Is that true? Can you?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard those kinds of stories as well. And there was something, at least on the Mormon side, a sense of kindred spirit. They're not Gentiles and neither are the Jews. This sort of like idea in their own kind of theology and mythology that for some reason embraced Jews, and this was true in Salt Lake City as well, The Mormons there supported the development of the first synagogue and actually paid for it, right? So I think these stories of kind of, shaking hands and that kind of thing, I do believe that that is true, and you hear variations of that in different places where Mormons and Jews inhabit. I think even to this day, there's some of my colleagues are involved in Mormon-Jewish dialogue. It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Who were the first Jews that settled in Ontario? Did they come from LA? Or did
Yeah, so I didn't find that, and I would have shared it for sure if I did. But typically, if you look at the stories, and this is just broadly speaking, I think you're onto something. It's typically starting out in LA, coming from the East Coast or coming from Europe directly, and then kind of branching out into this area. So in some ways, the development of Jewish life in the Inland Empire, Ontario, all of the different cities out here is kind of an extension of the LA story. In fact, that book that was shown of Jewish LA, I've been wanting to do a kind of sequel on Jewish Inland Empire, but I don't have enough photographs. I'm still trying to get enough. I need about 200 plus photographs for that. I'm only about halfway there. So if anyone has we're talking pioneer period, if anyone has 19th century photographs of the Inland Empire, I'd love to see them. I'll give them back to you. Yeah.
What was the first synagogue in this area?
Yeah, so the one in San Bernardino, Emmanuel. But again, synagogues come and go and that kind of thing and merge, and that's a whole other history I didn't quite get into. Yes.
I was gonna mention, Temple Emmanuel, and they moved into Redlands.
Yeah.
But just for curiosity's sake, they have a huge, archive of, early 19th century Jewish in California.
Oh.
They have a lot of documentation.
I will give them a call later today. Thank you. Yes, in the back.
Would you say something about Lewis Hellman, who's got an avenue named after him in Rancho?
Yeah, that's great. You mean Hellman?
Yes.
Hellman. H. Hellman.
Hellman, yeah.
Yeah, so Isaiah Hellman. What can we say about Isaiah Hellman? Kind of an amazing figure. Again, spent the early part of his career from again Europe, German-speaking area of Europe. Came to Los Angeles in the 1850s. He and his brother Herman Hellman. They were in the banking industry. Developed a bank in LA. Isaiah Hellman actually went up to San Francisco and consolidated the Wells Fargo business, sort of took over the banking side and developed Wells Fargo Bank. So, Isaiah Hellman is ostensibly the founder of Wells Fargo Bank. That's one of the things that he is known for. But there are streets named after him here and there in the area of Southern California. He was one of the founders of USC as well. So there's a street with his name around the USC area. But really an amazing success story, a banker who gave back quite a bit as well. And I think, again, his civic involvement is reflected in the streets. I don't know exactly the connection with Rancho, but I'm sure it's there. Vineyard, okay, perfect.
He had a lot of land and was.
Yeah, very much a landowner.
And that's been pretty well documented.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with the Model Colony Room in the Ontario Library? Because it really is a
I've not been.
Resource.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the best one around. And the librarians and archivists there are really good.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
It's in the basement.
In the basement.
So how were the Jews in Claremont and Pomona connected with the Inland Empire Jews?
Well, proximity, in terms of, what is the Inland Empire? It's sort of like a state of mind, right? Because, I don't know, there's not a huge difference when I'm driving across city lines from Pomona to here. And I think that that's kind of the point. These are all kind of artificial. There's that old saying, map is not territory. So in terms of like connection, certainly Jews from there come here and go back and forth, and connection historically, is that what you're asking? So that's another good question that I haven't quite explored yet in terms of Claremont specifically. I only lived there for a year, and I was preparing myself to do some exploration, and then I moved, 4 minutes down the street to Pomona. So I'm still kind of unpacking and stuff. But yeah, I mean, Pomona itself, like I said, founded by a Jewish landowner, very prominent, kind of on the level of a Hellman, at least locally, in terms of, he had a lot of real estate in downtown LA and so forth and so on as well, Lewis Phillips. But I think the larger point is that, and you didn't ask this question, but I should mention it anyway, so I apologize. When we're talking about how and why Jews were successful in these kind of miraculous or not so miraculous ways, it's because they were kind of here first, right? And if you look at patterns of Jewish residency across the country, if Jews are in the pioneer generation, they tend to do very well. There aren't these kind of barriers that are erected by the WASPs or whatever, who kind of have taken over the industries or taken over the real estate and so forth. So if you look in San Fernando Valley, Lancashire, that's probably a name you're familiar with. Well, he basically developed that area, happened to be Jewish as well, but again, on the ground level. So even though later on, in the valley, there would be housing restrictions, restrictive covenants, you're probably aware of this kind of thing. The Jews of the earlier generations weren't affected in the same way because they were there building it. And if you were crucial for the economic viability of these growing areas, nobody really cared. And particularly for Jews who came from Europe, who looked European, they weren't kind of outwardly otherized, right? They could blend in, call themselves German, and sort of succeed in that way. So I know you didn't ask that question, but in that sense, these stories are kind of all connected if we're talking about the pioneer period and Jews who succeeded. And of course, full transparency, not every Jew succeeded, right? Some of them went back to Europe. I mean, there are a lot of stories of that as well, but we're only highlighting the sort of admirable sources of pride today. Yes?
The archives at Temple Beth Israel in Pomona has a lot of information about the early decades of the 20th century,
right,
and how the Jewish population sort of arrived and grew. But two items that are particularly interesting are, well, there's a set of oral histories that was taken by confirmation classes in 1980 and 1981, and they interviewed people who had lived in this area as early as the 1920s. And they talk about, having their religious school instruction in chicken coops,
Yeah.
So it's very, it's just fascinating to read. This is jumping ahead a few decades from what you were talking about,
Yeah.
but in terms of how the population settled and grew in this more western part of the Inland Empire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm good friends with the Cantor there. I will ask. Part of it is I'm so new to the area. I'm glad that you're sharing all these different archives I can visit, because now I'm thinking again that maybe this book will be possible. I'll let you know. Yes.
You've spoken about your museum. Where is it located?
So it's fully online, which has really served us well over the years, especially with the pandemic and everything else. But it's all online, jmaw.org. It is a official museum, and it's one of those that doesn't cost any money to really operate beyond sort of the ordinary human aspect. But we can keep expanding it, and we do. So on that note, if you have any stories or leads on stories, we're always adding new exhibits as well. And I would say that the Inland Empire is underrepresented because of sort of the abundance of stories in LA and San Francisco specifically. So if any of you are interested or have, again, access to oral histories or anything like that, I suppose you can get my information. So anyway, I would love to see anything and everything. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a book that undoubtedly you've read is Pioneer Jews. It's about Jews in the West in general, and so many wound up as mayors and sheriffs. I also wanted to say that I wonder if the connection between Jews and Mormons is in part theological.
Yeah.
Because they believe that the Indians were the descendants of the lost tribes of
Yeah,
Israel.
so Mormon theology vis-a-vis Native Americans is pretty interesting. They actually, technically, there were other tribes that aren't even mentioned among the 10 lost tribes, sort of the unmentioned tribes, and the whole history of kind of the American experience with this notion of Native Americans being the lost tribes, etc. It's fascinating. It's kind of weird. It goes through different changes and variations, and it's it's one of those things. But I do think that you're correct. From the Mormon side, I sort of alluded to this, that from their perspective, Jews sort of inhabited a special class. And I think even when you think about Mormon history and how violently attacked, both in rhetoric and in actual physical violence, they were by Christians, I think Jews were seen as a neutral party as well. And by the way, this was true for Native Americans. Native Americans in many parts of the West preferred dealing with Indian agents and traders and so forth who were Jewish, because the Jews were not interested in converting them, first of all, and second of all, seemed to be more receptive in terms of learning about their culture, and came at it from a more curious and generous kind of perspective. So that attitude and that ability to kind of interact with different people, which was something that peddlers had to do. Certainly, most of the people that a peddler would interact with on a given day would not be Jewish, right? And in fact, if you had two Jewish peddlers in a territory, they would divide it up so that one gets half and the other gets the other half, and they would not even talk to each other until maybe Shabbat or whatever. So that skill is really crucial. So much so, by the way, one thing about Hellman and other early Jewish bankers, contrary to kind of later, and I hate to say contemporary, conspiracy theories and what have you, Jewish business people were trusted, and that was a key to success as well. And in fact, these early banks began with the gold rush and its aftermath, and people needing to put their gold somewhere, so they put in the Jewish merchant's store, and they would sort of create a bank in the back, and that would grow into a formal bank at a certain point. So I think what you're alluding to is kind of a more general truth, where Jews were seen as upright, and they didn't gamble, although some did, and they didn't do prostitution, although some did. You know what I mean? The stereotypes were actually positive throughout the West, which certainly went to the advantage of our ancestors.
And you may want to mention, undoubtedly, it's pretty well known that the Earp family wound up in Poland.
Yeah, so Josephine Marcus Earp was the common law wife of Wyatt Earp, and they're buried in the Jewish cemetery up outside of San Francisco.
Yeah, but the other Earps are buried in Colton.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll look in. I've only heard about Wyatt.
They were all in Colton. The herbs were part of established in Colton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that Wyatt is buried in the Jewish cemetery. I don't know about the others, but certainly Wyatt. That's actually the most visited, I've been told, the most visited Jewish tourist site in the Bay Area is that cemetery because of Wyatt and Josephine.
I know you didn't mention it, but it's just a question. We talked about the Phillips Ranch.
Yeah.
Did he acquire that or purchase part of the rancho that was in that area at that time before that?
Yeah, so it's a long story, but the short version is he was back in Poland. He actually had training in animal husbandry, which is one of the kind of approved Jewish occupations in that area. And he hooked up with a couple of landsmen out in sort of East LA County. There was a Spanish rancher who was going through some financial difficulty. There were a number of bad years with drought and so forth. And they ended up acquiring that ranch and then expanding from there. So, I mean, part of it was right place, right time. Another part was they already had this sort of skill. And the thing about Phillips is he wasn't really tied to the Jewish community as some of his relatives were, and really as many of the Jewish pioneers were in the LA area. So he was much more free to kind of go off on his own. He married a non-Jewish woman. They're buried on his property out there as well. The Phillips Mansion is still there in a very industrial area if you want to visit. But nevertheless, that's another part of the story too, by the way, is that Jews who came west in the early days were much less beholden to kind of family traditions, as it were. So you couldn't find a mikvah, you couldn't find a synagogue, kosher food, etc. There were compromises that were made along the way, also workarounds. Jews, talking about chicken farmers, Jews were often called egg eaters because that's what they ate all the time for protein, because they couldn't eat the meat. Although others, like I said, like at the Murrieta Hot Springs, they were happy to eat whatever was given to them. So again, as a general rule, coming out west meant that you were kind of a non-traditionalist in those days. And even if you were, Orthodox, as we call it now, you loosened a lot of that as you came west. One note on that, and I know we have to do the raffle. One of my areas of study is actually Jews in Western cinema, so cowboy movies. And you're probably familiar with the Frisco Kid?
Yeah.
So I'm friends with the screenwriter, Michael Elias. The original script, which he has shared with me, actually had these really wonderful moments where Rabbi Belinsky, Gene Wilder, he's coming through all these different areas on his westward journey. And a few times he actually runs into other Jews. This is not in the movie. But one is a store, like a general store proprietor who's working on Shabbat, and yet he's wearing a kippah. And Rabbi Gene Wilder asks, how can you do this? And the guy says, well, this is America. We have to kind of compromise. I need to make money to get the rest of my family out here. You'll understand, And there are all these kind of moments in that original script that were edited out by Warner Brothers, who was not so thrilled about making a Jewish movie, that we don't really get to see the full transformation. Really, that story was about a Polish rabbi becoming an American rabbi. And even the Torah in the original script becomes an American Torah. Because if you remember, sorry to be going on and on about this, if you remember the scene with the Native Americans and that sort of test by fire and so forth, that was all Gene Wilder's idea. The original script, Gene Wilder rewrote the movie, essentially, in large part. But in the original script, Gene Wilder's character he goes off looking for the Torah that falls off his horse. He goes back and finds it, and he finds a very kind of pleasant Native American community where, adults and children are playing out in the field and so forth. And one of them is wearing the Torah cover, like a 2-year-old. They found the Torah, they sort of fabricated the Torah scroll cover into a little dress, and he spots it, and then he goes and talks to the Native Americans, who, by the way, also, this is how interesting the original script is. He speaks with the chief through a translator who is an escaped slave, which was very common, actually. A lot of, shouldn't say very common, but it was fairly common that escaped slaves would go to Indian reservations, Indian areas, and become essentially members of the tribe, translators, sort of intermediaries between the tribe and others. So through this translator, Wilder talks to the chief, and they end up having kind of a deep theological discussion about, where does God reside and so forth. And in the end, they give him a new Torah cover, which is made of leather. It has beads on it. It's a Native American Torah cover. And so with that transformation of the Torah into an American Torah, right, basically it takes on the character of a native Torah, that just furthers the rabbi's transformation. All of this stuff completely left out of the movie. I'm going to share something. As we speak, and I don't want to get anyone's hopes up, including my own, but as we speak, we're actually developing Frisco Kid into a potential limited series that would kind of retrieve that original script and turn it into what it should be. In a more kind of historically grounded way. But who knows? That's a pipe dream at this point, but we're working on it.
What service is it going to be on?
We haven't gotten there yet. Warner Brothers still owns half of the rights. Right. Elias owns the rest. So whatever I can't even keep up with the streaming services, but I think WB must have they must be associated with one of those.
Aren't they all Jewish anyway, Jack Warner?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me started. This is my area. Can I share one little story? Because this is another very American story. If you're familiar with The Jazz Singer, right, which is the first full-length sound film, hard to watch today with the blackface, but in his day, Al Jolson was actually seen as a kind of virtuous blackface performer because he didn't make fun of, African Americans in the way that others did. This is what African American scholars and contemporaries actually wrote about Al Jolson, that he did it more sensitively, he humanized that caricature, and yet it's still incredibly difficult to watch, I'm not gonna lie. Nevertheless, that movie debuted on Yom Kippur in New York. There's footage you can find on YouTube of the premiere. Who was there? Well, George Gershwin was there. Other kind of, Jewish celebrities that you would recognize. And the Warner Brothers were going to go there too, but the older Warner brother, I can't remember the name and I don't want to ascribe it to there were 3 of them. The oldest, he actually passed away right before, sort of prohibiting them to, join with the festivities on Yom Kippur it's very suiting, right? If you think about the theme of the movie and this sort of tension between being American and continuing, your traditions, and there's that beautiful scene at the end of Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre, etc. There was a reason it was debuted there, even as it was very tasteless in some circles. But again, there was kind of this, I'll call it a conspiracy theory, that kind of the Warner Brothers got what they deserved because they chose to premiere the movie on Yom Kippur. Anyway, it's just a coincidence. But, Nevertheless, an interesting story. And again, it sort of, I think, reinforces this idea of how much do we Americanize, how much do we retain? And it's really a universal story. It's something that we're still dealing with as Jewish people. And I think one of the reasons why, if we are able to do that, the reboot, the limited series of Frisco Kid, a lot of that subject matter is still very relevant. Okay, I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that terrific presentation. I'm sure we all learned quite a bit. And we want you all to join us in the social hall for refreshments. But first, Jonathan will do us a favor and
Okay.
choose our winner of the wonderful raffle basket made by Yvonne.
Andrea, do you want to continue recording or are we good? You want to continue recording?
All right, this is totally random. I apologize, or you're welcome, depending.